Off, and we are recording now. So let's start our community call and ask me anything session about the social graph. This time this week the topic is the social graph, which is the core to how BrightID actually works. This is, I think, the most important product of BrightID, and I wanna hand it over to maybe Adam, maybe Mahdi or Mohsen, or core developers to tell us what this the social graph actually is and what it consists of. Uh, if you want me, I will share my screen and show you the social graph, the
Well,
social
wh-
graph as a website, and yeah, then we can start a conversation and ask our questions. I myself got a couple of questions about the social graph, even though I've been working on BrightID for the past 3 years, but I still have questions. So yeah, Adam, do you want to take this?
yeah. So first, I want to show what the basis is for this graph. Like, what is a graph? What does that even mean? And how does the graph get started? And a graph is really it just connecting the dots. If you can imagine a screen, and Puzzler sharing his screen. So these are a lot of dots connected by lines. That's all a graph is. And each dot in the graph is a person. Every time you make a connection, that's a line. So, Poslar, if you could end your screen sharing for a minute so that you and I can make a connection, I want to show people how you make one of those lines in the graph. So let's do it.
Sure
Um,
thing.
why don't Why don't you show me a code and I'll scan it? And if for some reason my camera's not great,
Yeah,
we
we
can
can do it
reverse
vice
that and do it the
versa.
other
Yeah.
way. Yeah. See if I can see how good my camera is.
Is it
Yep,
working?
it looks like I got it.
Cool.
Okay. So I will show what, oh, you did a group connection. Okay, that's fine.
Yeah.
So this is what I see on my screen. I see Poslar's lovely face. You can tell it's Poslar, right?
Yeah.
It looks a lot like it. So anyways, this is what I see. And then I'm going to confirm it. I clicked confirm. And then I get to see some information that helps me to make sure that the person that I'm just talking to right here, this Poslar matches this Poslar that I'm seeing on my screen on BrightID. And so I say, yes, this is the Poslar that I think I'm talking to. This is what I expect. Um, so one of the things that I want to show, hopefully I can zoom in a little bit here. You'll see there's something that says connection level, and it says already known. This is really important for the social graph. That not only do you know who it is that you're connecting to, you personally know who it is, but that you are able to, independent of the other person, select a connection level. So I select a connection level. Poslar has his own connection level that he's set for me. They don't necessarily have to match, but I already know Poslar. I've known him for uh, over 2 years now. And so I feel comfortable with the already known level. Let's say that Poslar and I made a connection and something really strange happened and the person I was seeing did not match the person I thought I was connecting to. There's another level called suspicious, and I can choose that. And that's kind of like my bailing out. It's very important to have like an escape hatch if something feels wrong, to be able to say, okay, like abort, I don't want to, without maybe causing any like social awkwardness or anything like that. I can just say, okay, he's suspicious. I don't, and then there's another one called just met. We had to create this one because to bootstrap the network, we've been doing these connection parties where people use BrightID for the first time. They learn what it is and they learn how to make some connections. And it gets them a very low level of verification that they can use in some applications. And that's where just met it comes into play. And then the highest level, which even Poslar doesn't have for me, is recovery. And that means that I trust Poslar with to guard my identity, basically. That if I lose access to my BrightID, which in turn has access to some of the applications I use, I need to trust some people to help me recover. This is very important. This is the best way. Vitalik agrees. I agree. Other people agree. This is the best way to manage your keys. When you get into the brave new world of Web3, you've got keys that you need to manage. And what do you do if you lose a key? Do you lose your bank account forever? Do you lose access to certain applications? In the Web2 world, you let something like a giant corporation like Google handle everything for you. And that has some advantages, but it has some drawbacks. In the Web3 world, instead of having some mega corporation handling your identity for you, you're handling your own identity, but you need some help. And your identity, if you think about it, is really not your own. You don't get to single-handedly say, I'm Adam, and everyone has to believe that. It takes some mutual relationships, some trust to be able to make that, and that's kind of the basis of BrightID. And so this level of saying, I trust Poslar with the ability to, if something bad happens, if everything falls in the pool at once, my laptop and my phone and everything, or my house burns down or whatever, I can get I can go to Poslar and say, hey, can you hit the reboot button for me and get everything back? And I can set up a few recovery connections, however many I feel comfortable, because these have to be people that I really trust, because they could also, if they're untrustworthy, they could come behind my back and steal my identity. So rather than trusting these random websites like we do now with our social security numbers and the ability to retrieve our identities, we pick the people that we really trust the most, and they get to recover the BrightID capabilities. So that's what the recovery connection level is. It's very important. Everyone should do it, if nothing more, just to practice doing it. If you have if your most trusted people in the world are not on BrightID yet, I have found personally that it works really well. If you tell someone, hey, I'm using this application, maybe you don't have a use for it yet, but you would really help me out because you're one of the most trustworthy people in the world to me. If you help to be the guardian of my BrightID, and they'll get it, they'll understand it, they'll set up their BrightID, and you can pick as many trustworthy people as you want to help you with that. So so that's really important. That's a very high level of connection, and there's those other levels that I showed you. So that starts to build up the graph of connections, and then there's some analysis that goes on that graph. But I think I've said a lot already, just about how the graph itself starts to be built. So I want to pause and see if there's any questions so far before we go into an even deeper topic, which is how does that graph get analyzed? So let's pause, just take a check and see if there's any questions so far. Let's see, I see something in the chat, but it may be related to POAPs. Yep, okay. Okay, so is everybody with me, or do we have any questions so far? I see some head nodding, so I think we'll go on. Okay, so now that we have that beautiful graph, and Poslar, you can bring it up again if you want, and we'll take a look at that beautiful graph. Now that we know what a few of the things that we've talked about mean, we can go and look at the graph again, and we'll see that that there's different colors, and now we know what those colors mean. But you'll notice if you're me or Paslar looking at this graph, you don't know. I mean, there's like these dots on the graph, they have these non-human readable identifiers, these strings of numbers and letters. And that's by design. That's how it should be. That's how it's meant to be. We do our best. This is not a perfect solution for keeping someone anonymous, but we do our best to take in as little data as we possibly can to do the job that we're trying to do with BrightID, which is allow you to prove your uniqueness in this graph. So what does it mean? There's so many points in the graph. What does that actually mean to prove your uniqueness? Like, how can you possibly prove that you just have one point in the graph? Well, you can't actually prove that you have one point in the graph. What you can prove, though, is, so scroll out a little more, Paslar, let's take a look at the big graph, and let's look at some of the ones on the outside. So if you scroll out into kind of like outer space, it's almost like the Oort cloud of the graph. There are these kind of connections just floating around the outside that are just kind of either their own little islands or they're just kind of like points in space. There's some weird little formations there sometimes, but these are not, so you can make as many of these as you want, but they're not going to be verified as unique. So the intuitive answer to what we're looking for is, are you well connected to the main part of the graph? And if we look at it at the problem that way, then it becomes the problem of how do we determine what is the main part of the graph and what is not. And that's what our algorithms are trying to do. And so to help with that, if you can zoom back into the graph, we look at some nodes, that some of the nodes have colors. There's seed and verified and not verified. So what is a seed? Well, this is a beautiful graph. And if I were to look at it, I might say, well, this is obviously the main part of the graph. These are where all the unique human beings are, people that are vouching for each other. But and then that outside part is obviously, the unknown area where they could very well be real people, but they haven't yet created enough proof, social proof. But let's say that someone was clever, an attacker, and said, hey, I'm going to make something that looks exactly like this. I'm just going to spin up 10,000 accounts and recreate this entire structure. How would an algorithm be able to tell the difference between that structure and this structure? And the answer is, the thing that breaks that symmetry is the presence of seeds, which are these blue dots. I'm colorblind, so I don't know if they're blue or purple, but I think they're blue. So there's these blue dots, and those are seeds. And seeds are, so it's kind of like this out-of-band process for selecting these pre-trusted areas of the graph, so that when an algorithm is trying to decide between two regions, which one is honest and which one is unknown, it can look at seeds and say, okay, this one has more seeds, so I'll choose this one over that one. So how are seeds selected? That is actually up to, and maybe we'll get into this topic, but there's different ways to analyze the graph. So each node operator can choose more than one, different ones, different ways to analyze the graph. If a node operator says, okay, I want to see what answers I get by using this set of seed nodes, they can do that. They can rerun the same algorithm or slightly different algorithm with different sets of seeds and see how it works. So there's lots of different possibilities for seed selection. One of the things that we're doing now is we have something called a seed DAO that was founded by some of the same core people that founded BrightID, and they basically do some, I guess you could call it due diligence, in selecting communities that have a high level of trust from I guess, our point of view, because we have to start somewhere. And we select those to be seeds. They register with us, we vote on them as a DAO, and then they get added to our registry of seeds. If some other node or some other algorithm says, I don't like the way that the BrightID seed DAOs are operating, so I have my other way of selecting seeds. They can do that, and they can come up with a different set of answers. So this is different than what you might be familiar with blockchain, where in blockchain, you want every node, and I'm talking about node now as a server node in the decentralized network. You want them all to come up with the same answer, and there's some clever ways to make sure that they come up with the same answer and still remain decentralized. In BrightID, we allow node operators to arrive at different answers, and we think that that's okay. We currently use the blockchain as a way to have consensus about the state of the graph. Just the basic information that people are sharing with each other, that does get shared around using a blockchain. Again, this is anonymous information, these anonymous connections. When you send that name and photo, that doesn't get put on the blockchain. That doesn't get put on servers, other than to temporarily route that to the person that you're trying to send it to, but it's peer-to-peer. And that's not something that the nodes get to look at in the blockchain. So but they do come to a consensus about this anonymous graph. And then after that, they're free to come up with their own answers about what that all means. And they're able to come up with their own answers about what the seeds should be, if there even are seeds. Maybe there's algorithms that don't even need seeds. I don't know. I tend to think that there's at least need something there, but I don't know. There's the door's kind of opened for other types of algorithms. But so they come to a consensus about this basic information that was used to build up the graph. Then from there, they arrive at different answers, and then there are many different ways, many different possibilities of how an application that wants to find out the answer to the questions of, is this person who's registering with me, is this person considered unique by BrightID nodes? One possibility is I could query 10 different nodes. Well, I guess you can't do that, since I think we only have 6 nodes right now, but you could query all 6 BrightID nodes that are running the same algorithm, see if they agree on the answer. That's one way you could do it. You could set up a DAO where people go and get their own answers from the nodes and prove. We allow nodes to sign things cryptographically, so they could prove that a node has verified them, and then you could do it sort of optimistically, where other nodes can look at the answers these nodes are giving, and if they object to the answer, they can say, okay, no, I got a different answer than that, I object, and register an objection. So there's different ways that you can get a sort of consensus on verification. But there's different ways, and that's up to applications and up to the nodes how they want to decide to do that. So there's a lot of flexibility there. And so I hope that kind of gives an idea of what it means to run a node on BrightID, what kind of information you're getting, what you're processing. We have not gone into the actual algorithms yet, and we may be able to get a little bit into that today. But again, I want to pause and see if people are with me. Okay, so here's Spencer. How do you prevent a single person from having 2 accounts connected to a different subset of their real life friends acquaintance? Yes, this is a very, very important question. So I like to separate this problem of proving human uniqueness. It's easy for me to reason about if I separate it into two distinct sub-problems. The first are these large-scale attacks, where I'm primarily operating maliciously with myself or maybe some colluding attackers that I've gotten on my side, and we're creating our own graph, and then we are social engineering people to connect our fake graph with the real graph, and trying to create some sort of large scale Sybil attack and get it verified in BrightID. So that's one attack, and so there's some of the, I mean, so we have to think about, make sure our analysis methods can do a good job with that. And then there's a different category that I like to think of, which are these small scale attacks. So let's think about a single person, like Spencer said. If this person says, okay, well, I've got, 3 or 4 kind of realms of people that I know that I can connect to, and they don't know each other. And I can go to each one of them and say, hey, help me get verified on BrightID. I need you to make some connections with me. And for the, if we're just using things like, if the limit of the type of connection that we're doing is just the ones that I showed you, then there's nothing to prevent someone from doing that. So this sort of base level, this level 0 verification that we've been talking about, is not going to do a great job of protecting against that sort of small scale attack. But so what we need are stronger connection levels. We need connection levels that do more than that. So I think recovery connection levels are kind of on the starting to get into the area of something that could prevent something like that, because even though you may have 4 separate groups of people, you may not trust all of them enough to be the guardians of your identity. And the other stronger type of connection, which we have not created yet, are connections where someone uses the history that they have with someone, like the and a social recovery connection might have this deep history with someone. But imagine that you have a deep history with someone, and you not only know them, but you know something about their other connections. And so imagine making a connection with someone and pulling in some of those other people from that person's history that you have with them into the connection, and making that connection. And so now you've got a much stronger connection there. And now what you can say is you can start to rank those connections. So you can say, okay, well, is this like the in the white paper I call them primary groups, but there may be a better name for that. But is this the most, like the most trustworthy, the core group of connections for this person, or is it some secondary group? And you can start to rank those, and then you get to the point where you have a graph of these core connections. And so even though you may have some of these secondary connections that are maybe your second most, third most, fourth most trusted groups of people, you're only going to have a small number of these really trusted connections. And so and then you're going to have people that can vouch for that whole group of connections at once, and that's another key. So if you're doing that, what you end up with is a graph that, I don't know, maybe each person only has 3 or 4 or 5, a small number of these really strong connections. But this isn't Facebook. We're not this doesn't have to be like a collection of all your friends. So if you look at me and Paslar, yes, we have hundreds of connections, but you don't have to do that to make BrightID operate correctly. What you really need are the strong connections. And so even though BrightID right now, because we're in the bootstrapping phase, operates like, okay, if I've never used BrightID before, I show up and I just connect to people on a verification party. We want to move progressively to stronger and stronger connections until we can make connections that are so strong that they that they can even shut down these small scale Sybil attacks that Spencer was asking about, where it's like, okay, my coworkers don't have the same authority as my immediate family. So let's see, is it possible to create legal entities in BrightID, or can every node represent a real entity? Wow, that's a great question. I would say yes. I don't see any reason not to. I don't see any reason why that couldn't be possible. Sure. I mean, if that adds a layer of authority to the answer that a node is giving, then sure, why not? And so is there any more detail on that question? And maybe someone else from the team might have an opinion on that other than just me, because this isn't something that I've thought deeply about. Does anyone else want to answer that or add to that question or add to the answer? Yes, Ed has something.
Ed is asking a question, but
yeah, I was hearing kind of a struggle with that question that you were answering.
Yeah.
A lot of what we talked about early on in our conversations with you guys was this validates somebody as a human being. And we have this political struggle about acknowledging corporate entities, as a human, having free speech, etc. So you get into some deep waters there if you start acknowledging simply a legal fiction of some person versus a human being. Because part of the argument I heard from you originally was BrightID is to validate human beings to keep bots off of systems. Now, I don't know if that's faded as things have developed, but that certainly was a point I was hanging part of my hat on. And, this causes a certain confusion.
Okay, thank you. So I think I was also confused by the question, because immediately, so I think I was confused by the dual meaning of the word node, because I was thinking, okay, can a node, as in a server that's operating the BrightID graph, use its authority as a known legal entity to add some weight to their decisions? I was not actually thinking of legal entities in the BrightID graph. But this is that question has come up before, and I think that actually may be the question that he was asking is, can there be nodes, meaning the points in the graph that are making connections with other people? Can those be in the graph? And I think that the problems that we're trying to solve have to do with unique humanity, and so I think we're trying to allow someone to prove their unique humanness. And so that doesn't extend to, I don't know what the answer to that question is. If you're a legal entity, I think the answer is that you're composed of unique humans. Is there going to be a way to show how you're composed of unique humans without bringing too much private information into the graph? I would say that that's got to be outside of the core of BrightID, if we're answering questions like that, like what is it? But I think BrightID can be helpful for that. So let's say that the entity is my neighborhood park, and let's say that I want my neighborhood park to be able to receive funds, and since we're talking about Web3 and decentralized autonomous organizations, I want the park to be able to pay people to have its own fund and be able to pay people to keep it clean. And so I want it to be represented as a dot somewhere, if not in the BrightID graph. And I think where BrightID can help out with that is you can have people vouching and saying, yes, I've been to this park, I've been to, this, it really does exist. This is the right one. This is the one everyone thinks it is. And I can use my my BrightID verification to say that while still remaining anonymous. So I don't have to say, yes, I'm Mary Jones from down the street from the park. I can just say, yes, I'm a person, I've been there, and this is the real park. So I don't know how de-anonymized you have to be to make assertions like that. I don't know if just saying I'm a unique human and here's my answer to the question, depending on the entity, that may be enough. right now you see things like token curated registries being used to validate entities and saying, yes, this is the entity everyone thinks it is, and you can challenge it and pay money to assert things and stake money on it. But maybe there's something where maybe there's some other option where you can, I guess, throw your instead of throwing money at it, you throw your weight as a unique human being to be able to vouch for other entities and say, yes, I know that so-and-so is a member of this entity, or I know that this entity is the entity that everyone's talking about, or whatever.
Well, the different sense is, though, if I am vouching for another person, I'm only vouching that they are human and I know they are human.
Yes,
That's
exactly.
tight criteria. But if I
Yes.
start talking about an entity, am I validating that that park is where they said it is? Am I validating that these people keep it clean?
Yeah.
Am I validating that I'm allowed to use it because it's public? What am I validating then? Now I open up a big spectrum.
Exactly. So because of that, I would say that this is not core BrightID, that answering those sorts of questions, you may be able to leverage your unique status as a BrightID citizen to help answer those questions. But no, that's not going to be, I don't see that being core into BrightID, and I don't see that graph that Paslar showed being a mixture of humans and non-humans. I don't think that when we get to, I think what the line may start to get blurred if we get to Blade Runner territory or something, where it's like, oh, I didn't actually know that my son was an android. Okay, wow, that's weird, or something like that. But I think for the immediate future, we're answering the question about unique human status because we're trying to unlock a lot of, there are a lot of benefits that are just kind of waiting in the wings to be able to get out to all of humanity, like being able to pay a dividend to all of humanity, if being able to have a vote that includes all of humanity. These are the things that we're trying to unlock, and any by extension any kind of sub-circle of that can be included in.
Let me ask you about
BrightID.
subcircle, okay?
Sure.
Because we started talking about seeds while I'm asking questions here. I'll keep you a moment. You're talking about seeds. I was wondering, that we're involved in starting this group called YARSI, and with an intention to grow it to 10,000 people to see if DAOs, et cetera, can scale, because we don't have any examples of anybody scaling to that level. So we've talked about using BrightID as, in essence, our member ID process. Is there a way to use seeds to be able to put the YARSI group over here and say, we know this is the YARSI group?
That's exactly what they're for. Yes.
Okay.
And so we should create.
We need that wasn't clear that was there before. I think.
So I think we need to create the right number of seeds, and that's something that we have some experience with using our seed DAOs, and we can decide the right seed structure that's going to work for your work for YARSI and that organization. So I think it can be very, very individual for organizations how they want to manage seeds, and certainly they can say, hey, there's this seed movement going on, and I can see that the BrightID seed DAOs are adding like a bunch of different seed groups all over the graph, but we don't we don't actually need that or want that. We know we have our own method of selecting seeds. We know what it is, and we're going to use that, and we're happy to show you how to do that.
Okay. And just one other final comment. Are you aware there is a group out there using a seed token that is about global development kinds of things? That's the best definition I can give it. So I don't know how much confusion we start throwing seeds all over the place, what grows from them.
There's also the Common Stack. Shout out to them. They have a notion of trusted seeds as well. So yes, seeds is a pretty common metaphor. I don't think it's going to cause any problems. Hopefully not. But yeah, I mean, seeds. So the Seeds Initiative could have their own seeds in BrightID that are different from this, what they call seed. Yeah, there could get a little hairy once they start doing that. But that's all right. We'll figure it out.
I'll turn it over to somebody else with questions.
Okay, do we have any other questions in the chat? Let me see. If advertisers want to be sure unique individuals are seeing their ads, it can be monetized for BrightID users. Yes, awesome. Oh, okay, that was a direct message. Sorry, I should not have read that. But yes, so ad fraud, click fraud, those are things that are BrightID can really help them. Let me see. Okay, BrightID is about validation of unique entities in the longer run. What properties that entity is? Another question: is it human? Is it a bot? We will want validated bots. Is it a business? Yeah. So I think what we can do is we can take what we've learned from verifying unique humans and apply it to verifying other things, verifying the uniqueness of other things. Like, is this a real bot? You know, you can take sort of the same approach, like I was mentioning with the park analogy. Like, okay, I know this park. I've been around this park. I grew up by this park. Whatever. It could be the same thing with whatever that bot is. Like, I know how this bot was created. I know where it lives. You know, I know these things about it. I think some of these concepts do translate into other possible graphs. Let's see, am I missing any other questions? I don't think so. Okay. So we are getting, let's see, we have 17 minutes left. What topics do you guys want to hear about? Because I don't know what we should. Okay. Because I don't know what, I don't think we're going to get into the specific algorithms, but I will say that if you go to the BrightID node GitHub repo, I've posted some links to some papers that are really interesting that talk about ways to analyze social graphs that have been done in the past. One of the nice things about BrightID, as opposed to analyzing the Twitter graph or this Facebook graph or the Yelp graph, is that we can sort of we can start with we can create the types of connections that are going to work really well for graph analysis, whereas Facebook has other reasons for being. It's not just here to help people get identified as unique human beings. It has other motives, and some of those are going to be more important to them than identifying unique human beings. I remember when I started using Facebook, they had certain requirements that seemed to value having unique humans, high quality, at least high quality accounts. They required you to share your college email address to even get into Facebook. But then those requirements got relaxed more and more over time. And now, I mean, people even wonder nowadays, like, does Facebook really even care if ad fraud is going on? If they're showing their videos, if their advertisers are showing videos to bots or humans, does Facebook, I mean, how much do they actually care about that? How hard are they trying to stop it? How how hard are they cracking down on botnets? And unfortunately, because they're behind closed doors, we don't know. They have a Facebook fingerprint that fingerprints all of us to maybe there's the potential to know if we're unique. We don't know what that is. We don't know how they're doing it, and we don't know how well they're doing it. We don't know how much effort they're putting into it, and that's one of the dangers of a closed system. Also, with the fact that if there was some internal fraud going on, that would be very hard to detect. So if there was some reward, let's say, that was being given out to so-called unique Facebook accounts, how do we know that there's not some internal problem that allows Facebook employees to generate thousands of their own accounts, even if they're cracking down on bots from doing that or something from outside? So transparency in the process, generates a higher level of trust. You can, if I'm running a BrightID node and I'm running an algorithm, I want, we don't require this, but I would want people to see what I'm doing, to see how I'm analyzing the graph, to be able to understand it. And I think that would add some trust to the algorithm that I'm using, if people can see exactly what I'm doing, if it's open source, if it's built on research that they can see and improve upon themselves, and it's kind of like this iterative open source way of improving algorithms. So so to me, that's a better solution. Also, just the fact that you should, like, the graph shouldn't be owned by an organization. Like, I shouldn't have to get someone's permission to use this graph. And when it comes to the graph of my connections and the people that I have some information about that has been shared peer to peer, I should be able to take that with me wherever I go, and I shouldn't have to ask the permission of some entity to use my own graph. It's my graph. Like, I should get to use how I use it. So these are reasons why our graph exists outside of the sphere. Not that it can't bring in information from those other spheres, but why it exists independently of things like Facebook and Twitter. Okay, so I guess that was an answer to a question that nobody asked, but I felt like saying that.
A related question.
Okay, but here's a question: how is the BrightID graph data stored? So we kind of alluded to that it's shared back and forth over the blockchain, so it is public information. But that the private pieces that people use when they're making connections with each other is not part of that. So you can see my qualitative connection that I've made with Passler. You can see what level I assigned to it, when I made it. You can see connections that we have in common. So I hesitate to say that we're operating an anonymous graph, because if a motivated corporation or government could look at that and maybe compare it to Twitter or Facebook or something and find some overlap there. But it's stored on the nodes because they just so that the analysis can go faster. They have each node has a complete copy of the graph so that they can quickly run the analysis. And but it's also on a blockchain. You could piece it together from the blockchain by looking at transactions that have been posted on the blockchain for other nodes to read. So we leverage the blockchain for consensus. Does that answer the question, or is there more to that question? Okay, that answers it. Okay. Yes. So if you want to understand some of the really cool algorithms that have been used in the past, check out the BrightID node repo. Look at some of the links there. You can also go look through our code and see. We actually have a really cool, that Graph Explorer you've seen. There's a related application to that allows you to build your own graph. You can start with the BrightID graph, or you can start with an empty graph. You can build a graph. You can create your own algorithms in Python, or modify existing ones, change the parameters, and you can run the analysis without having to run a BrightID node. You can just run the analysis and see what answers you get. Try out new analysis, and we definitely want to offer bounties to people who are making new breakthroughs, either discovering weaknesses that then lead to improvements, or just coming up with their own algorithm. So if this is something that's really interesting to you, like it is to me, and you want to spend some time with these graph analysis algorithms, then yeah, we love that, and we want to encourage that, and BrightID DAO wants to pay for that effort. So Yeah, I hope that my hope is that BrightID gets well funded enough and useful enough that we are at the forefront of pushing this research into in new expanding the boundaries of the research that's being done in social graph analysis. And because I think a lot has been done, but it's just scratching the surface, and I think there's a lot of breakthroughs that are still going to happen in graph analysis, and I want BrightID to be this huge driving force behind making this more useful. So so that's our vision for graph analysis and the social graph. See, anything else? Yes, Maddie wants to say something. Oh, actually, this is a really good question. I just want to point out that this question was asked. I don't know if we're going to answer it because I want Maddie to be able to speak, but Mario just asked, how would BrightID be able to regulate access to underage people? That's a really good question. So let's at least note that question was asked. Okay, go ahead, Maddie. What were you going to say?
Please answer this question, and if there was any time after that, I will talk about something about previous questions.
Okay, so there's no simple answer to this question. So the way that we handle it with our BrightID application, if you look at our user agreement, it says that that custodial accounts are fine, that we consider anyone under the age of 14 to be operating a custodial account. Their parent or guardian would be in charge of that. We've had families come up for certain applications and say, here's my BrightID, here are the BrightIDs of my children, and is that okay? And we say, yeah, that's fine. How do I think it's beyond the scope of what the BrightID app is trying to do to say to differentiate. We want to keep as much private information off the graph as we can. So I think applications would have to have something else, have their own way of differentiating between the custodial accounts and the adult accounts. So yeah, that's not a complete answer, but that's what we're doing so far. So go ahead, Maddie.
یه سوال عمومی که از زبان برایت اینه که از این شبکه استفاده های دیگه‌ای بشه. مثلا یه مثال خیلی ملموسش برای تحلیل میزان اعتبار مالی یک فرد، یعنی تحلیل این که ما چقدر اعتبار میتونیم به یک فرد اعطا بکنیم، میخوایم به صورت شبکه‌ای اینو مثلا اندازه‌گیری بکنیم. این یه مثال. حالا مثال‌های دیگه هم الان تو جلسه مطرح شد، مثلا اینکه شخصیت حقوقی میتونه وجود داشته باشه. میخواستم یه مقدار در مورد این صحبت کنم.
Maddie says there are discussions about using the BrightID social graph for different use cases other than verifying unique humans. He makes this example of having credit assessment based on the BrightID the social graph, or having discussions like the one that we just did about legal entities being a part of BrightID, or being vouched for or verified by the social graph that we have in the BrightID. He wants to talk about these use cases now.
برداشت من همیشه این بوده که BrightID داره یک بیس فنی رو فراهم میکنه برای تحلیل گراف و تشخیص تمرکز، تشخیص دیتای فیک از دیتای واقعی که میتونه جاهای مختلف استفاده بشه. ما تو BrightID داریم برای اثبات یونیکنس از این تحلیل گراف استفاده میکنیم، برای اینکه نشون بدیم کجاها تمرکز داره اتفاق میفته و کجاها توزیع شدگی وجود داره. اما همین الگوریتم و همین روش ها به احتمال خیلی زیاد برای ارزیابی و استخراج انواع اقسام نوع گراف های مختلفی که یالها در اون ووچ برای یونیک بودن نیست، یعنی که من فلانی را میشناسم نیست. اونجا ممکنه یالها ووچ برای این باشد که من به فلانی مثلا $100 بنزه $100 اعتماد دارم. میشه تو این الگوریتم ها رو انواع اقسام اینجاها استفاده کرد.
That was a lot and so technical. So, so Maddie says in BrightID, we are building a technical basis for different approaches of graph analysis. And we are creating real data here with the people interacting with each other. Now, with the same the approach to a social graph, we can have different use cases. We can say in BrightID, we are considering the meaning of the connections between two nodes as people vouching for each other's uniqueness and saying this is a real person and this is a unique account. In other social graphs, in other algorithms, they might consider a connection between two nodes as, for example, meaning that this person has lent $100 to this other person. So with these different algorithms and different analysis, and these connection graphs having different meanings in different algorithms, can have different uses and use cases of the same social graph that we are creating. And this provides lots of opportunities for different projects and different uses of the social graph.
Yeah, so I just want to interject something very quick here. So as far as sharing that information with other nodes, so the basic connections that are being made through the mobile reference app right now, those we feel okay with sharing those in the network of nodes so that the nodes can have the same basic graph to work with. So it's an interesting question that once you get once you add more meaning to the connection, do you want to, how openly do you want to share that? Maybe we would not consider the blockchain anymore, or at least not unencrypted sharing through the blockchain of financial information that may be happening between different nodes in the graph. So something to think about. But go ahead.
اینا قطعا همچین دیتایی رو من منظورم نیست که جزء برایت آیدی هست. من فقط میخواستم بگم الگوریتم هایی که برایت آیدی برای تشخیص تمرکز استفاده میکنه داخل گراف، همین الگوریتم ها احتمالاً میشه جاهای دیگه توی اپلیکیشن های دیگه که گراف رو بر اساس کانکشن هایی با معنای دیگر میسازن، همین الگوریتم ها احتمالاً قابل استفاده است برای تشخیص تمرکز، تشخیص دیتای فیک و تشخیص عدم تمرکز و دیتای واقعی و ریلایبل.
I'm trying my best to convey what the Maddie said. Maddie says he doesn't want to say that this kind of data is available in BrightID, but he says the same algorithms that are detecting the concentrations in different parts of the graph can be used in with having different connotations, with vouching for different facts about the very same social graph. I hope I said it correctly. I think Maddie would like. I tried.
Okay, Paslar, I think we've reached the end.
Yes,
what do you think?
And our connection party is going to start. If you are not verified on BrightID and you want to make some connections and get verified, we have a Spanish connection party already, like in a minute. We also have an English one in an hour on Zoom. You can find these on our Discord. I hope one of our BrightID stars can put a link. I'll try to put a link as well. Here you are. So you can join our Discord and hit the party reminder for a link to a connection party so we can make connections and get you verified on BrightID. I want to thank everyone for coming. And this one is like the social graph, and the technicalities regarding the social graph is one of the most challenging parts of BrightID. And yeah, and thank you everyone for coming, and keep in touch. And if there are any other topics that you want to have a community call and ask me anything session about, please don't hesitate to mention it in our Discord, in the general chat, or in the Connection Cafe, so we can provide the opportunity in the following week.
Or the
so
YouTube comments. YouTube comments.
Or the YouTube comments are a good place too. So yeah, we are open for further discussions and further conversations about different aspects of BrightID. Once again, thank you everyone for coming, and see you next week. Take care. Have a good one.
Thank you, guys.
As always, good morning, good evening, and good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. See you soon. Bye.